I'm Kurt Hentschläger. I'm an artist, audiovisual usually I call myself. I am answer the question to how I started. It's really a long time ago. I actually started as an architect. I studied architecture for 2 years. It was the wrong school anyway, so I knew I had to move. And then through a friend, I happened upon a lecture at the Museum of Modern Art in Vienna of the then very young Peter Weibel. And so I was quite intrigued by his, everybody I think who knows him or knew him, his ability to, of course, first of all, speak forever, but really be very knowledgeable about art history, all kinds of important things connected to art and the making of art and so forth. At that point he had an early class in Vienna. It wasn't yet a media class, it was actually a class to train teachers, and because that was opening. And so I applied to go there. So I went to the Academy of Applied Arts, which at the time was the hot school in Vienna, to study with him. And I think I started actually as a painter there, believe it or not, because at that point I'd done many different things. I'd done some photography, some film, some sculpture. I was all over the place. And then I remember at some point, and I think this was really sort of the very beginning seed, because Peter would come in and say, for instance, any of you, have you seen Tron, the movie? And pretty much everybody would say Tron. And then, he would tell us to go see Tron. So it was in my early 20s, right? Beginning of the 20s. So we went to see Tron, mind blown, something. And then at some point, he brought in a bunch of Commodore computers. Text-based still, DOS, not like, GUI. I was not attracted whatsoever because one of my best friends then worked for like a month to make a line mannequin go to the right and then back to the left. And I said, you must be freaking kidding me. So I wasn't hooked then. But generally what was obvious, not just to the class, but everything that went around at the time, that personal computers would have a lasting impact and something would really have the potential to change things in a big way. And I remember thinking then, well, as a contemporary artist, or as an artist who I want to be able to truly understand the world, of course the history, the now, what probably might be in the future. So I have to look into this. I mean, I need to, not indulge myself, but immerse myself. I think indulging came later. At some point, much later, to make a jump, I think, and at that point, I made sculptures, machine sculptures, partially with program controls, mechanical program controls. I made early interactive sculptures with some very bad electronics. And I still made films with my girlfriend then, which were like very surreal, fun, humored, with humor films, I think quite successful. And then I got my first computer, which was a Commodore Amiga. That computer changed everything. And I stopped leaving my studio, my apartment. I was just like, this was it, 24/7. I was like so hooked. I mean, to understand it, to learn it, to see the potential, and to really try making art with it, right? In that respect. In that first year, I think I would spend weeks without seeing people. And I would just, at some point I would wake up from like a stupor, and then realize, oh my God, I need to see people, I need to have human contact, and I would go out and find parties and, you know, spend like a night or something and then go back to do more of that. So that really was for me, and that was I think it was in 88. I don't really remember exactly, but I think it was 88. I did a project with a colleague of mine together. This was one of the reasons also to get the computer, which was a light matrix for like a special event. I don't even remember. He built the lighting matrix, and we designed the whole piece together. And I think he also wrote part of the code. I did the visuals, whatever that was. I mean, my memory is very, very, I don't know, faint. But yeah, and then pretty much the next years, this became the backbone of my practice. I did like, I think it's important, and I'm sure other people have talked about it. At the time, there were personal computers. There was no infrastructure, right? There was the internet, like the academic internet, all text-based. There was no connectivity, and it was all really expensive. I mean, I think I took a credit, my first loan, to buy the computers and some floppy disk drives and whatnot. Hard disks were completely unaffordable. But anyway, that's besides the point. After that, for me, it was completely clear, right? This is it. So I was not interested in anything else. And it's not, I think, partially, of course, and this hasn't changed until today, is a very seductive medium. It was a huge hypnotic, what's it called? Pull. You know, like it's trancing. Like this, but working with computers, and it hasn't changed for me until now, other than, of course, by now I'm mostly irritated about spending too much time with technicalities and not being able to actually work with the medium and create, right? Getting lost in problems and whatnot. But this is how it really started. And everything else then, in a way, was colored by this, or informed by this, or even if it was early, for the next years after, there was no digital video, right? There was digital sound already, with the Atari, mostly, and sequencing, MIDI sequencing. There was, but at the same time, I forgot about that. So 5 of us in this alternative cultural center, the Werkstatt und Kulturhaus in Vienna, we became friends then, and we founded a collective called Pyramedia. Because at the time, like, these devices were so expensive that one person, right, bought something, and then you joined forces and you made a studio with the 5 whatever pieces of equipment that from each side. And Wolf had, Langheimer, my later partner in granular synthesis, brought the synthesizers, and somebody brought like a video mixer, already digital then, and we bought through the center, through the WUK, we built a video studio with U-matic machines of all things. It was U-matic, like high band, but still, and a heavy camera, and it took really a long time until video went digital. That was took until, I think, Ulf and I, in 94, we were in this residency in Northern England with Mike Stubbs and time-based Hull time-based art. And that's where we, came about the first Avid online system, right? Non-linear online system with full SD resolution. Seems also quaint and so cute at this point. And that was also I think talking about, this is my main memory, quantum leaps in what you can do, right? Like seminal leaps of ability what granular synthesis did is really based on single frame editing, structural film, right, video, whatnot. And we did a lot of the early works. Model 3 was done on U-matic. And you had, every edit was like 2 minutes. One frame, 2 minutes. So, go figure how long like anything will take. And then there was Model 5, which was developed on Avid. And all of a sudden you could make like infinite loops, and you could make libraries of loops, and just, it's really quite breathtaking, actually. So it was still, in many ways, aesthetically and historically, from the origins, from the concepts, it was really rooted in film and experimental film and video. But because of the computer, which is still, right, like this is for me one of the main aspects still of computing. It's about amplification, acceleration, and multiplying. So your abilities go to the moon. Yeah, so that's what happened initially. Process in that medium is obviously very fluid, because it is really depending to some extent on generations of machinery and whatnot, and you grow with your concepts, your proposals, your work grows with the abilities of machines. There's no question. For instance, with granular synthesis, we went after there was a period of Avid, right? It was still a very nonlinear video. It was multi-channel. There was always multi-channel sound, of course. Our intention was to be overwhelming, to be visceral, this sort of media avalanche, where you have only one option as the audience. You can subscribe to it, or like allow it, right, to flood your senses, to even take it into your body with this like, sub-bass, infra, whatnot, vibrations that you hear with your body. Or you just say, okay, this is not for me, this is way too much, and you leave. So it was very important for us, this like almost black and white. So, and but it was still complex in the sense of, or sophisticated in the sense that it was compositions, right? Like Model 5 was a 44-minute originally composition, which in a very traditional sense, it starts in a very mellow way. It's almost like seductive, meditative, like, the heads like hum a little and so move slightly, and it's quite beautiful, almost boring, but you feel something is coming, that's obvious. And then there's this cut to this mega frenzy that everybody remembers, like the screaming machine. And eventually the last half, or almost half, is just about emptying out and going nowhere, and like the battery dies, and it's like this very slow death. So yeah, there were effects, there was, there's all kind of in-your-face sort of attitude, but in a way it was really operatic, I think, if I look back at it. And then there was a moment where we realized, okay, we want actually to be able to integrate the video much more with audio, because the whole sense was, right, we have whatever we do with the sound, it happens with the video at the same time, and vice versa. There's no distinction. Sound and image is the same. They are created in an original moment with a recording session of a performance of a performer for the camera. So we would sit, a K-meter K and Model 5, or whoever we worked with would sit in front of a camera, in front of a blank space, and then we would ask the performer to do certain things, right? Move the head, but also sound, or like move your head rapidly, and as screams or sing, like Akemi was a classically trained Japanese performer and singer. Very interesting. And then, so what I'm saying is, there would always be the synchronicity of sound and image. And that's, I think, what people fascinated. How is this possible? That it's so synchronized. But it was video and it was sound, the additional sound, the bass and the techno, the early techno grids, that was in parallel and then came together in the live show and installation. So we worked with a programmer eventually and developed a software, like a monophonic audio-video sampler that was MIDIfied, that also had, towards the later part of the development, which took about 2 years, I added like a black and a white frame that could be intersected. So it became this flicker engine. And at that point, and that had happened like organically. Like there was a transition from body to abstract imagery to landscape. Partially had to do with that we were traveling like crazy, like for years. We were pretty much always on the road and like show, another show performance, whatnot. There was a point of exhaustion. And somehow, this is the interesting part, I think, of an artist's life. So you respond to what is, right? Whether it's in the world or in yourself. And then things change in your work. Somehow Flickr reappeared, which I was always fond of for obvious reasons, because it allows you to enter this heightened state, as it's called, and somewhat conscious, somewhat unconscious, or subconscious. And so the new technical setup was this MIDIfied video sampler that just seamlessly blended into the audio sequencer composition platform. That means we could now like compose just from one timeline everything together at any moment. And it could be also live. We had all these kind of MIDI interfaces. We did a lot of live shows where you had partially prepared, of course, tracks or like sequences. And then you can, at any time, you can come in and improvise. And so all the shows became, that was interesting. If you do, I found, if you perform a particular piece really many times, and in our case it was sometimes 20, 30 times, then you, in order to keep it fresh, you have to sort of work with the material and go with the flow of the moment at any given location, right, or continent. And that later, that's still part of that is still very part of my practice. That never goes away. I mean, it's like whether I do any installations that I create, and any time I bring it somewhere, like next week to Budapest, this darkness piece, Sub, there will be changes, because the respective space, the architecture, wherein this thing will be, unleashed, or like displayed or diffused, that will change, acoustically anyway. You have to respond to the acoustics. There's like no way. A lot of it is this minimal, abstract pulsing, sort of gestalt, sonic gestalt, and so that has to be adapted. And then somehow it's equally uncomplicated to, of course, at any time change the visual, whether add or enhance or tweak it. So it's always like a work in progress. That said, like Sub is really, that's the end of development. That's like a solid piece that I think after, at least this is 2019 originally, and there was a pandemic, so it was like a little hiatus. It always takes me, let's say, 2 or 3 years with a particular work. And much the same with granular synthesis. You launch it, you premiere it, and then every time it's shown, performed, installed, it will grow, it will be finessed, and at some point then it's done, right? And then you move on to the next one, or it's in parallel. But this is about the process, and you can do that other than in the old days, because it's all malleable. Everything is malleable, right? Or whether that is really videos or 3D content or generative content, or I mean, the more let's say the more digital, the merrier, right? If it's real-time 3D, it's of course perfect, or if it's some sort of code that creates images or visuals, right? All these kind of things. So, yeah, and that ultimately has a negative. There's a lot of positives, but there's like a detriment. And the detriment is that it's always bound to certain hardware and software generations. And I found, because I've done this a few times, 10 years after, right, a work that hasn't been shown in a while, or that has had its run but then went into the archive, and it's supposed to be shown once again somehow, and then you immediately into a restoration project, unless, and that I learned the hard way, in a very rigid way, you decide this project is now done, or not really requested anymore, it doesn't have, it's not invited anymore, whatnot. But I will keep it exactly, the computers, the backups, the spare parts, this will all go into like, a file in a box, not to be touched, so that actually you can, at any given time, revive it if the hard drives start up, right, let's say. And it's really hard to do, because you pile up just machinery. Some of it will still not survive, because it will die, electronics die. I've seen it, I've seen everything. It's just, you try to start it, doesn't do anything. And in that respect, my favorite comment on this one, I know I'm jumping around, but there was, I live in New York, so there's not that many institutions or places, at least in the beginning, for contemporary media, digital art. There was upstate New York in Troy, which is the oldest engineering school in the States. There was somebody like alumni who gave the school, it was about 25 years ago, gave the school $300 or $400 million, a huge amount of money. And they built with most of it the MPEC, Electronic Media Performance Arts Center. And then they hired Johannes Goebel, who was one of the founding members of the ZKM, to build it and then run it. And I became, over the years, friends with Johannes, and I thought he was really doing great work, and often up then in residences. And once there was so many technical problems, and I was out of my mind. It was a really big project with a really serious deadline, and I was completely desperate, because I was there only for 2 weeks, and it was just about tweaking the finale before it would ship out actually to London. And so he came down, we had an appointment for dinner, and Johannes comes down and sees my despair. And then he sat me down, like it was very fatherly, and he said, "Look, Kurt, you have to understand, this is an ephemeral practice. This will all blow in the wind. Whatever happens at the end, we will give, at the end of our lives, we will take all these hard drives, so that all the materials, and hand it either to our children, whoever we think might be taking care of it. They'll try to do something with it, read it, despair, and it will end up in the trash, like 99% of it." And that was, I completely agree. I agreed then, I still agree, right? It is a performative, ephemeral practice. This, because the development is so fast and so constant, and the hardware does not last, certainly not longer than maybe 20 years. Electronics die. I've seen this so many times now. Condensators, just name it, whatever. Some parts of it. And yeah, so it's the opposite of being a sculptor working with stone or the pyramids, right? It's a crazy practice. I mean, the conditions and let's say the pragmatic background around the field really can vary so much. I mean, this is like, it's mind-boggling. It can be anything from a bare bone setting, right, which you do for love, of course, and because you really respect and like the people, to some very lavish situations. And that actually, this is already after production, clearly. There's of course the step when you want to produce a bigger project, then it's about fundraising, like with most anything, right? And there was, I found, that has changed really a lot, but what is actually fundable, all these kind of things. So there's this element now. But generally the way I did it, or I do it, every time I think about a new project, a bigger project, there's a proposal, there's like a framework, and then I try to find partners. And the partners will then, there's a budget, there's a cost frame. And normally I think when I have about 2/3 of what I'm thinking it will cost, which is always like optimistic, meaning it will always cost more. But then I will start producing. So at some point you have to say, okay, let's do this. And then there will be, and the good news, what I found about trying to find a number of institutions or places that produce something, because that also will create the initial tour, right? You start there, then it goes here, and so a lot of people can see it, and hopefully from this beginning, from this introduction, the first year of introduction, it will find interest, and it will create interest, and more people want to show it. So this is about how it works, and I mean, for me anyway, the tricky part is, and this, I don't know how I even managed sometimes, because I often do things where I do not see certain consequences, like with Z, or this fog, stroboscopic fog web, which had a huge run, and like it's sort of, I would say, one of my most well-known work. I knew there was something like, let's say, like photosensitivity, right? That certain people react to flickering light. Once it's very intense, once it fills your view field. But I had absolutely no idea that this could be so amplified in certain settings that, you have many seizures, a lot of people who cannot digest this impression. And so then after the fact, so the work is produced, it starts showing and starts touring, and now you find yourself, oops, somehow I didn't understand this up front. I didn't take care of that. So now, quite frantically, or like with a high, not with panic, but with high urgency, I'm trying to find solutions, right? After the fact. So of course in that case I became an expert in photosensitive epilepsy, right? I want to understand everything, and then and I talked to neurologists, which I really, in hindsight, I should have done before, because we did a lot of flickering with granular synthesis. We had one case ever of somebody having a seizure, and that was even a person who knew she shouldn't. It was a woman, shouldn't look at it. But with C is a completely other animal. If you're slightly photosensitive, you will have a seizure. This is so immersive, and so all enveloping, that there's no escape. So that was a real challenge. This is what, and then you have to weigh, right? Well, first of all, should I continue showing it? My wife, Claudia, says, it's ridiculous, right? I should not show it. What do you do if somebody at some point dies? Because, it goes in there, a photosensitive person, but he's also prone to a heart attack, but doesn't know about either. And then I say, my argument, and this is still my argument, even though I'm really, I know there's a stretch where I'm worrying anyway all the time, but if you grow up as an Austrian, this is my core example, right? You grow up with mountains and with hiking in the mountains and climbing the mountains. And very early on you have to understand two things. Like, if you do that, there's an element of risk involved, period. If you are not in a good shape, if your equipment lacks, you don't have good shoes, and at the minimum some weather shielding, like a backpack, of course, with essentials that you could protect yourself from the element if the weather changes, all these kind of things, then, it's your problem. It's nobody else's problems. You're not prepared. Because you exactly know what's coming your way. The great thing about mountain, I don't know how familiar you are with that, but the wonderful thing about going up the mountains is there's this, you walk out of the lowlands, the day-to-day normality, right? You walk up and up and up, and there's less and less, eventually less trees, it gets more and more like desert-ish and scarce, but the sky opens up, ever more sky, and ever more light, ever less oxygen that comes, right? You expand strength and energy, and the oxygen level goes down. So this is a strange thing. And I think all of this transpires for you to have this ever more sublime impression of, or sense of being up there. It's really quite riveting. I haven't done it in ages because I'm in New York. What do I know about mountains any longer? But it's very addictive. And every year a lot of people die. And everybody knows this, right? So anyway, my long story short, I decided early on, once I realized there was a risk in this work, that I would be super transparent about it, that there would be infinite warnings, caveat, like one of the neurologists I talked to, the then director of the epilepsy center at NYU, he said, you have to be careful with warnings. Do not warn too much. You will stress people, and some people can will themselves or somehow transport themselves in a state of, they're not photosensitive, but yeah. Anyway, so there's warnings, you have to sign a waiver. There's no question that if you enter there is an element of risk, and you decide whether you want to take it or not. That said, every time it happens, it's very stressful for the staff, for everybody, and I'm always happy when the exhibition is finished or the live show is done. Then I sleep better. So the one thing, because I'm working on a short statement for this conference tomorrow, right? On the occasion of the publishing of the Encyclopedia of Media Arts that was published this year finally by Bloomsbury, and so this volume 2 is all artist chapters written by artists, and so it's a celebration of sorts. We haven't seen each other, I think, since the pandemic. I never met Paul Thomas, the editor. And so as I'm writing this, and this is about getting older, my main concern nowadays, and really worry, is that all this technology, this explosion of technology, and this is like, of course, digital at heart, but it connects to all the other technologies, right? Mechanical system, all early industrial, it's all like a big mega complex now. And in my lifetime, I have seen the planet wilt away because of it. And, you know, I've been to China and, of course, Southeast Asia, where you build cities overnight. You know, there's a countryside and farmland, and like a year later you have this kind of thing. It might not be even used, or it might stand empty. It is an extremely, everything technology is extremely resource hungry. And in a time where we all fret and so I have this dooming sort of sense, right? What happens with climate change? What's really gonna happen? Everybody feels that there's a dark cloud of our heads, but still, it just continues. We're on this autopilot. And I think this is also for me striking here at Ars Electronica this year. Of course, AI and soon AGI will be is in the forefront, and this is the new big thing. What nobody seems to talk about, that there was a concern about how cryptocurrencies need so much energy, right? Nobody talks about this anymore, and nobody talks that AI or AGI uses 100 times more than that. That like 3 Mile Island in the States, there's like a nuclear power plant that was closed because of the accident a long time ago, has reopened exclusively to deliver like power for some Microsoft data centers, AI data centers. That the transition to electric vehicles and all this electric new grid, that's in danger because every little kilowatt of hour available goes to AI. So I think it's insane. I think it's completely insane. We are literally on an autopilot mode of innovating ourselves to extinction. That's how it feels to me. And I really do believe that as an artist, like, at least that was one of the reasons I became an artist, that you're like a critical instance, right? That I, as an artist, am supposed to have a wide perspective, not a narrow perspective, a wide one, to understand historical connections, that I understand, you know, like economic systems, ecology, like pretty much everything. I mean, I'm like, for me the day never ends because there's so much still to learn and understand. And so, and you need this in order to be able to assess and make, and not that this is a literal thing, right? Because I don't really believe in making an artwork that is literal. I'd rather think ambiguity is where it's interesting. But yeah, I feel there's way too less critical thinking and introspection about technology. It's like technology is just great, right? Even though I went around today in the exhibition, everybody is very concerned. Most young artists, for obvious reasons, right? They're worried, but everybody still uses the existing systems. Because what else to do, right? Nobody can go back to the Stone Age. So it's a paradox, but we have to resolve it in time.